All right, hello. It's good to be with you again today. And I'm excited to give you part 2 of our previous video, the 3 keys for creating change in your relationship. And today we're going to go over in a little bit more detail that last point that we were talking about last time. I want to share with you a little bit about how you can be the change in your relationship and several more points today on how that's possible and how you can be effective in that goal. So stay tuned. All right, so you'll remember from our last video, we were talking about 3 keys for creating change in your relationship. And I went over 3 areas in which you can kind of think about and apply toward change toward the goals that you would like in your relationship. And the first of those areas was you can't make a person change. Trying to keep in mind this concept, right, that no matter how mad we might want it for somebody else, we can't really force change in another person. We can kind of temporarily demand or control behavior, but that doesn't really equate into long-term change in the life of another person. So keeping that principle in mind, right, that we can't make somebody change that doesn't want to. The second principle was that influence is not the same as enabling. And you'll remember from our last video, right, that we differentiated these two things. The idea that our goal is positive influence in the life of somebody that we care about, and helping them come around to some of the needs and the hopes and the wants and the wishes and the desires that we might have in the relationship, and using relational strength to drive that type of change versus enabling. Enabling is just when we try to avoid conflict and create peaceful feelings in the relationship, thinking that somehow that improves the health and the wellness of the relationship. And it does in a sense that we're not having conflict as often, but conflict doesn't have to be bad. Conflict can inherently be good if we can use conflict to create understanding and awareness and a deeper connection with one another. And we do that when we communicate through conflict well, right? And so we've put out video courses on this subject, our Advanced Communication Strategies video course, in the Maintaining Intimacy and Sex video course at part 1. We talk about communication language that helps drive connection and emotional intimacy. And in our whole module in the Renew system, we talk a lot about things to avoid and things to do in resolving conflicts. You can even take a look at our Resolving Differences video course, and it goes a lot into this idea of how do we work out differences that we might have in our relationship. And the reason we've put out so many videos on this subject from different angles and highlighting different principles is because communication issues is the #1 issue that couples run into when they're seeking out professional support. And so we want to make sure we give you lots of tools and strategies to help work through some of your communication concerns. So keeping in mind that second key principle, right, that influence isn't the same as enabling, right? And just because I'm enabling positive feeling in the relationship doesn't mean that we're actually growing closer together, right? I might be enabling the exact behavior that I'm frustrated with in the first place, and that just drives that irritation and frustration underground, allows it to fester in that place, and one day it's going to rear its head and it's not going to be good for our relationship, right, as that builds up inside me over time. And it's not really fair to my spouse either if I'm keeping that to myself and I'm not sharing those things in a way that we can kind of work through them in the relationship. It's not really fair to them either because I'm festering kind of negative feelings without giving them the opportunity to be part of a solution, right? So keeping in mind that second key principle. And then the third one, this is the one that we're going to spend more time on today, is the idea that sometimes you need to be the change in the relationship. Sometimes the change needs to come from you, that you've got to be the change in the relationship. And I want to dive into that one a little bit deeper. The main reason is because this is one that you have some of the most control over in the relationship, right? That it's the self. And the role and the part that I play in the relationship that I have the most influence and most control over, right? And so if I can understand a little bit about how my role works and how I can use my role in the relationship to support and motivate and promote positive wellness and healing and connection and resolution in the relationship, I can be empowered to do wonderful things in my relationship. So I want to teach you a little bit how to do that. And we're going to focus on 3 additional principles today that have to do with that number 3 key area, right? That idea that sometimes the change needs to be me. So the first one that we're going to talk about is this idea of reinforcers, right? I'll go into some detail about what positive and negative reinforcers are and how you can use those in a marital relationship. The second one is I'm going to go into and talk about acceptance and the role of acceptance in creating change, that there are some things in life that I might just need to accept, and maybe I don't need to change at all. and when to discern that, how to discern that, when I'm being too picky or making too big of a deal over something that might not actually need the change that I would hope or that I would desire. And then the third one is the role of change, the role that I play in change, right? And how I can use my role in the relationship to promote change, right? So understanding my role, the role that I'm playing in a system, in a feedback loop, or in a couple system, and using my role, pivoting in my role a little bit to foster the change that I'm hoping to make. So those are the 3 areas that we're going to jump into today. And I'm so excited because I love these principles and how they empower couples to do a little better, to get a little more connected, to be a little bit closer, and to work through and resolve some of the items that they're really struggling with. So let's jump into this first one, the idea of reinforcers. So reinforcers, you'll remember, if you'd like to review, go check out our Supporting Children YouTube video. I'll put that right here that you can take a look at that YouTube video. And in that one, I go into a lot of detail about positive and negative reinforcers, and specifically in terms of how you might use these with children, right? And the same principles apply with adults as well, right? With my spouse or with partners at work, with a little bit of tweaking, right? That I can apply these principles with other people in my world. And a little bit of tweaking, I say, because we want to approach it a little bit differently when the hierarchy of the relationship is equals, right? So husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, engaged partners, right? Partners are meant to be equal in a marital type relationship, right? We're not meant to have dominance one over another. There shouldn't be this hierarchy of control in a relationship, right? And so when we're equals in a relationship, we want to think about using positive and negative reinforcers a little bit differently than when I'm in more of a leadership role, or I have the responsibilities of a parent with a child, right? Inherently in that type of relationship, like a parent-child relationship, I'm meant to be in a higher place in the hierarchy, right? I'm meant to be kind of leading out in that relationship. There still needs to be love and respect, understanding, right? Like seeking awareness, receiving influence from my child. There still needs to be some of that openness for my parenting to be really healthy in the relationship. But there should be kind of this one step up hierarchy. And the same may be in a leadership role at work, right? That there needs to be kind of this leadership hierarchy a little bit, that I'm still connected to those that I'm having influence over, right? But I need to be kind of leading out in that relationship. And so we use reinforcers a little bit differently in those types of relationships. And you can take a look at that Supporting Children video to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper in how you might use positive and negative reinforcers in one of those kind of one-up hierarchies in a relational system. But today specifically we're talking about for couples, right? And in a couples relationship, we're meant to be equals, right? It's part of what makes a couples relationship healthy, is we need to love and respect and support one another, empower one another on an equal plane, which means neither one of us has dominance over the other. That should never be happening, right? You only see that when relationships start to go a little bit codependent or a little bit abusive. And I would certainly say we need to tackle those concerns very quickly if we want a healthy relationship. So we're equals, right? And I'll give you some definitions for positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is when I know my partner well enough that I know those things that are motivating for them, those things that are pleasing for them, those things that they desire or that they enjoy. in life and in our relationship. And I use those things, those positive reinforcers, intentionally to help promote and motivate pleasing and positive behavior, right? Wellness for them, wellness for us, health and wellness in our relationship. That I use positive reinforcers to promote that, right? So a positive reinforcers is when I add something to somebody that they enjoy, right? As a result of something that they're trying to do. So I use the example, I believe, with the supporting children video about how I might use something like going and getting a soda at a soda place with my child as a positive reinforcer for getting their homework done during the week, right? That at the end of the week, if they've done that really well, then I might say, hey, let's go get a soda. And, kind of as a fun reward for this hard work you're putting into the relationship. And a similar principle like that can apply in marriage, right? So I had a couple, and they both were hoping to get the other partner a little bit more focused on things that mattered to them, right? So the wife in this relationship, she was really frustrated about him and clothes and not getting folded and put away. She loved doing the laundry, but she was really concerned about getting the clothes put away. And so one of the positive reinforcers that she came up with, that they came up with together in the relationship, is that she was aware that he really enjoyed when she would wear a cute little number on the weekends when they had times for physical intimacy. He really enjoyed lingerie, and he enjoyed that in their physical intimacy. And so as a couple, they kind of talked about, or she's like, how can I help motivate this? Because it means a lot to me that the laundry gets put away and that I don't have to do it, that you do it, right? That I'll do the laundry and that you work on folding clothes and putting them away. I have to share a closet with you. It's really frustrating when they're just kind of in a pile. I don't love it. It makes me feel a little bit cringy about the hard work I put into cleaning those clothes. And I know it frustrates you too, because then they're wrinkled when you're trying to put them on. And if you're in a hurry, it creates frustration for you. So how can I help you do this thing better, right? So she wants from him this idea that he focuses more on folding and putting away these clothes. And she knows that he's been talking with her a little bit about how he appreciates when she goes a little bit further into the planning process and wears a cute little number during a weekend rendezvous with each other, right? So she kind of comes up with this idea of like, hey, how about we both work on this thing then, right? She's like, I know you've been wanting this a little bit more from me during our opportunities for intimacy. So how about if you work on folding and putting away the clothes and cleaning up our closet through the week. On the weekend, I'll let you pick a cute little number for me to put on while we have our physical connection, right? And this was pleasing for both of them. Positive reinforcement for both of them, right? She was motivated to be a little bit more thoughtful and invested in this thing that mattered to him in their physical intimacy. And he was motivated to spend a little bit more time cleaning up the closet and keeping it straightened up, right? So that would be an example of a positive reinforcement in marriage. Now, we don't want to make our positive efforts contingent, right? We can kind of turn into a quid pro quo if we're not careful, or a contractual type relationship, which just means I'm only motivated to give in ways you want when you give in ways that I want. It's almost like a contractual exchange, right? That says I have no obligation to you unless you're doing the things I want you to, and then I'm obligated to do the things you want me to. And that's not healthy in a marriage. Sometimes people get trapped in that they only kind of give and take contractually. And we don't want contractual. Another way to say that is that they have kind of a conditional love exchange. And we don't want to make our giving in the relationship conditional. Our goal is to give in ways that are free and that are loving and that aren't based on specific requirements for one another. We want to give out of love, not out of obligation, right? And we talk a little bit about this in our Enrich module, right? We dive into this idea of reciprocal fulfillment, the idea that we want to learn each other well enough to try to be pleasing to each other often, focusing more on how I can give and be pleasing to you instead of selfish focus on what I need, right? And when two people do that, when they're focused on giving, neither really needs to worry too much about receiving, because both are trying to learn their partner well and give in ways that are meaningful to their partner. So we don't want to get into a quid pro quo. We don't want to create a circumstance where as a couple, they're only giving in contractual ways, right? But what we're saying in this example is she was aware he enjoyed this thing, right? That didn't matter as much to her. She really enjoyed the physical intimacy on the weekends, but the lingerie thing just wasn't, it's not a big deal to her. But she was learning that it was a bigger deal to him. It was pleasing to him, right? And she wanted to create that pleasing in the relationship. But she also herself was interested in a cleaner closet. And so it worked out really well for them to say, hey, I'll work on this. How about you work on this, right? And because of that, even if they weren't perfect, their goal was to still work on that thing for their partner, right? Even if their partner wasn't perfect, they're not withholding or using withholding as a control measure. They're still wanting to give, but it just motivated both of them to try a little harder. They were both kind of motivated in this thing. Another example of this is a different couple was preparing for a cruise. They were going to go on vacation together. It was the first cruise they'd ever been on, and they were excited about it. They were excited about the time that they would spend on beaches and bathing suits and the sun, and they were excited about all the food that they might be able to eat as well. They might eat their way through this holiday, and they were super excited about that, going on this cruise. And they both had a goal to lose a little bit of weight before they went on the cruise. They wanted to be their best self physically. And they wanted to lose a little bit of weight in preparation for the cruise. And so months ahead, they kind of set a goal. They both set an individual goal for what a healthy weight loss effort might be before they go on this cruise. And they both kind of came up with that number, and they shared that with each other. And they said, okay, how do we encourage ourselves to really do it this time? Instead of like we did at the New Year, where we just started a little bit, a health plan, and then it fell off 2 weeks later. So what they came up with is, there's this excursion we want to do, zip lining, that what we'll do is if we can reach our goals before the cruise, these kind of health goals, we'll give ourselves that excursion. We'll kind of splurge on that excursion and go do that zip lining activity. And but if we can't, if we don't reach the goal, then we agree with each other that we're not gonna go on that zip lining activity. So the zip line became a positive reinforcer for both of them, right? They were both working toward these individual goals, and they decided together that to help motivate that, they would give themselves this zip lining experience. And so they started preparing months in advance. They hit their goal, and they really enjoyed a zip lining excursion. And that's an example of a positive reinforcement, right? They added to themselves in the relationship something positive that they were both invested in response for reaching a difficult goal. And we call that positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is kind of the opposite. Negative means withholding something as a reinforcer, right? Not offering or taking away something in the relationship as a reinforcer, right? So the zip lining is also an example of a negative reinforcer if they didn't reach their goal, right? Because what would have happened in their agreement is if we don't reach this health and wellness goal, we're going to withhold from ourselves the zip lining experience. We're going to take that away, take it off the table, right? We'll save the money. We won't do the zip lining, so that it can be a motivator for us to really hit our health goal. So that'd be an example of a negative reinforcer, a taking away something in the relationship to reinforce a behavior that's not going well, right? To kind of say, hey, this isn't good, so you don't get this thing. And in children, that makes a lot of sense. Or in the workplace, right? In the workplace, an example of a negative reinforcer might be you don't get the bonus, right? The bonus was contingent upon these types of things. You didn't kind of hit those benchmarks. Therefore, the bonus doesn't happen, right? So the bonus is taken away as a reinforcer to next time, let's try harder to reach those goals, right? Or in a parent-child relationship, it's maybe losing an Xbox if you're acting out often in the home and in the relationship, right? That the Xbox might need to go away. So those are examples of negative reinforcers in those relationships. And in a couple's relationship, this is what it might look like, right? Like the excursion maybe needs to go away because we weren't reaching the goal. Now, you need to be careful with negative reinforcers in marriage because sometimes that easily turns into this concept of withholding that I mentioned earlier. right? So withholding could look like, hey, I know it means a lot to you when I cook an enjoyable meal for you, but you haven't been focused on the finances the way that I wished you had recently. Therefore, no soup for you, right? I might go into this place where I say, I'm going to withhold this thing you really like in the relationship as kind of a punishment or a consequence to you, in a way to kind of control you or have dominance over you, to kind of punish you for this thing that wasn't pleasing to me. And we want to be really careful about that, because negative reinforcers in relationships, especially in marriage, can easily turn into control strategies, right? That we can withhold things like physical connection. We can withhold things like praise or adoration. We can withhold things like quality time. We can withhold things like financial access, right? That we can become really controlling in a relationship in harmful ways if you're not careful with negative reinforcers and how you use them. Because again, our goal isn't to dominate our partner, right? Our goal isn't to be in a situation where we exude kind of control over our partner in a marriage, right? Our goal is to reinforce things that help our relationship grow and progress, things that bond us closer together. So we need to be really careful about that. It may be appropriate sometimes, like for example, if a couple I was working with a couple who was in a conflict, and they had a pretty negative conflict during the last week, in such a way that they both lost their tempers a bit. They said some pretty harsh things to each other, and they were both hurt as a result of this conflict. And at the end of the day that this conflict occurred on, she kind of hinted toward the idea that she'd really like some physical connection. She was very much a physical touch lover in the relationship, and she wanted some reassurance and physical attention that evening. And he just wasn't in a place to offer that. He was still kind of emotionally hurt, and he was a little bit more of an emotional intimacy lover. And so the harsh words in the conflict he was still recovering from. And it was very appropriate for him to say, hey, I love you. I'm just not in a place to connect like that right now. Like I really need to kind of recover a little bit, and I could use some resolution with us before I'm in this place to kind of give myself physically to you in the relationship. And it was hard for her because she really wanted the reinforcement of the physical connection. But it was healthy for him to not overextend himself physically in that way at that time, right? So it was healthy for him to kind of offer that negative reinforcer. It's not really to punish her. It's not really to withhold from her in controlling ways, right? It was just meant for him to withhold in a relationship for his own sake while he recovered some of those emotional feelings, and while they had a chance to repair before he made himself that vulnerable physically. And that's a really healthy use of this kind of negative reinforcer idea, right? Withholding something in order to reinforce something, right? That I really need to have better emotional connection with you, more emotional safety with you, before I'm going to feel safe to be in a situation to kind of offer myself that vulnerably, right? But you can see how close that line is that could easily turn into control and punishment if he wasn't careful, right? That he might be in a situation where he could actually physically connect with her, but is just withholding in order to punish her, right? To make her think twice next time they're in a conflict for not choosing the thing that he thinks that they ought to do, right? And so he could withhold for purposes of teaching her a lesson. And we definitely don't want to do that in marriage. That type of control, that type of withholding is not healthy in any couple's relationship. But to say, I have this boundary, right, that I need a little bit of space and time before I can offer that to you again, is very healthy. And it's good for couples to respect that mutually with one another in kind, considerate ways, right? Like being aware of those things that we both need. And I was proud of this gentleman in this situation because they did. That evening, she was calm. I was proud of her as well because she was calm to that resistance to connect physically. She really met him where he needed to be, and they had a conversation, and they worked it through pretty well. We met the next day. We talked through that conflict a bit more. And by the end of our time together, they had really done a nice job resolving kind of the emotional injuries of that conflict. And later that evening, he was very proactive about physically connecting with her again as soon as he was back in a place where he could offer himself in that kind of way in the relationship. And it was great for both of them, right? It was good that he took that step back and had that boundary, and it was good that they made the opportunity to reconnect later, right? So thinking about this in your relationship, how can I use positive reinforcers? That's the one we want to use the most, right? Like, what are motivating things I can learn about my spouse that as I ask difficult things of them, that I also have some things that I can offer that incentivize and then make that fun, right? Like, make the sacrifice not just a grind, but make it fun and enjoyable, right? And then what are situations that are good to use some negative reinforcers, right? Taking away something for the sake of healthy boundary and healthy expectation, not to control, right? Not to demean or to demand or to hold hierarchy over my partner, right? But those healthy boundaries that help us kind of work through and address negative behaviors in the relationship and promote those things with positive reinforcers that are good. All right, so I'm going to leave that topic for a minute. Positive and negative reinforcers, that's one way in which you can create change in your relationship.